it's that time of the season again. It's the star ratings now. We've seen all of the cards. Now I'm going to give my opinion on how good they are. In case you've never seen my star ratings before, normally I will give something 5-star if I think it's going to go into a tier 1 deck, 4-star for tier 2, 3-star for tier 3. 2 is I don't think it'll be in a top 3 tier deck, like it's going to be tier 4 or less, or it's a card that might see play in a tier 1, 2, or 3 deck, but will be dropped eventually, and basically tier 1 will see no play. There are some minor exceptions, and I'm going to point out in this episode, one of the cards will be an exception to this rule. And I basically give the exception if I think a card is so good that it's going to be in almost every single deck. I normally bump the star rating up by 1. And I think there is one card from Demon Hunter, Druid, and Death Knight, who we're going to be dealing with today, that I think is so good it will be in most decks for that class in the foreseeable future. Normally I like to do these after the playtests as well from the streamers, but unfortunately I'm moving house around then, so I'm actually physically moving this time myself, so I can't do it. So I'm getting in a little bit early. Anyway, first and foremost, let us deal with Death Knight. Death Knight is in a really volatile position right now, more so than almost every other class in the game, so we're going to have to spend a little bit of time on this one. So, Death Knight obviously is one of the newest classes. They have a lot of stuff that is rotating into the core set, so you may have noticed that core set thing is massive. It's simply because there's not enough cards out there yet for Death Knight to be able to be stable, right? They had to have this Path of Arthas thing. All of this stuff is rotating out. The core set's not big enough, so they're putting stuff into the core set. That's kind of the general gist of this type of thing. Other things that have been noticed, and I don't think they've been fully announced yet, are that some of the rune requirements are changing. And it seems that there's a big shift going away from these triple rune cards to, at the most, being double runes. So I think in the next year, we're going to see far, far fewer triple rune cards. Like, I don't think you're going to see triple blood. I don't think you're going to see too many triple frost, although Frostworm Theory is rotating into the core set. So of all of the triple mono rune classes, I think that is the one you're going to see the most of, is Frost. And I think Unholy will now mix with a little bit of blood. So, again, there's going to be so many different decks out there for Death Knight than there were before. So, it's really complicated, the star ratings for this deck. It's also worth noting, before I did this, I had a look through all of the current decks in Standard, and I saw how much the end of season, rotation was going to affect them. And always at the end of a year, the game is more volatile because not only is the core set rotating, but you're losing 3 of the sets and bringing 1 in. So there are some decks that simply will not be viable. And weirdly, I noticed, and you're going to notice this for my star ratings for the future, there's a lot of tier 1 decks I think are going to still be viable after the next set coming out, the Whizbang Workshop. But the tier 2 decks are getting absolutely gutted. I think there's only like 1 tier 2 deck that is still going to be viable. So that is the place. There's this incredible power vacuum in tier 2, and then Death Knight is having its core set change, and it's having its identity change. So yeah, the star ratings for this are, of all the ones I think I'm going to get wrong, it's probably Death Knight I'm going to get wrong the most. Anyway, Rambunctious Stuffy. The single Frost Rune card we were shown is a 3-mana 4/2 Undead Beast Rush. After you cast a Frost spell, gain Reborn. I think this is only going to go in your Triple Frost deck. I had a look through the Triple Frost requirements. I think you could build a deck around it, but it's just not so scary anymore. Frostworm Fury coming up like that turd later when it was nerfed a few months ago. It really hurt the deck, right? So I don't see it being above... I don't see it even being tier 3. So Stuffy, I think you'll see some playtesting in the Frost archetype, but you won't be good enough. So I'm just going to give you 2 stars. Next, we have some cards which I think is the next identity we're trying to give to Death Knight, which is this hand buff Death Knight deck that I think is going to be formulated with single blood, double Unholy. So you get the aggressive minions from Unholy and the double Unholy, and then you just get these hand buffing cards which are an identity of the blood rune requirement. Now, I have tested out, and you may have seen the video, a hand buff deck for the current set, and it actually performed pretty well, but it's kind of like the triple Unholy. Anytime you get board cleared, and you've board cleared your big buffed minions, you have big sad times. And I think this is going to be the same for the hand buff Death Knight. So I don't actually see this making tier 2. I think it's going to be a tier 3 deck. I do think Darkthorn Quilter, Amateur Puppeteer, Shambling Zombie Tank, and the Headless Horseman will all make that deck. So I've given each of these 3 stars. Lesser Spellstone, sorry, I've only given 2 stars to. I think this card will see testing in the hand buff Death Knight deck, but I think people will determine that it's too slow. I know, like, in theory, if you get your... It's like 15 corpses, right? No, 10 corpses. You can get it through to +3/+3 to every undead in your hand. But you have to play with some vague idea of tempo, even in your hand buff deck. If you play too late, then your opponent will have more answers to deal with your big minions. So you always have that trade-off with the hand buff deck. It's the problem Paladin always had with hand buff Paladin. Very rarely has hand buff Paladin ever worked. And I think Death Knight will have the same issue. Now, you may have noticed I'm not giving Headless Horseman a rating. This is because Headless Horseman and Rainbow Seamstress, I think, will go into Rainbow Death Knight. Rainbow Death Knight currently sat like at the low end of tier 1 from the last time I checked. And I think both these cards will just slot straight into it. I think the Headless Horseman is a great alternative win condition to anticlimactic necrotic explosion, as I call it. So yeah, I think that's a great alternate win condition. Also, the button is going to be just nice for controlling the tempo of the game. Eventually, you're going to get some additional value on top of that. It's all lovely. Rainbow Seamstress, I think, is just an incredibly good card if you're running this rainbow deck. The payoff is so nice. You can kind of see it depending on the attack minion you trade into. As 3 mana deals 6 damage, gains 6 health. That's crazy. That's really good. So both of these cards I've given 5 stars to. I think they'll just slot straight into Rainbow Death Knight. And I think it'll still be a tier 1 deck after the rotations. Then we've got a few oddities. Silk Stitching, I don't actually know where this is going to go. I think maybe it goes into Triple Unholy, but I'm not convinced by this card. I don't think the pool of cards that cost 4 or less, or spells more specifically that cost 4 or less, is there for Death Knight. I don't think you would want to run it into your control Death Knight archetypes with more blood runes, as they have better removal in this than this kind of random talented one. I think the best case scenario for this is you take one of the unholy board buffing cards and stitch it to one of your minions, and probably you stitch it to your button press, right? So you can kill it immediately and get the effect of the spell. It's almost equivalent to the school teacher. Her name is escaping now. The Naga school teacher, who was a really good card, don't get me wrong, but I think this is worse than School Teacher didn't see playing like every single deck, so I'm giving this 1 star. I don't see it right now. Then we have Threads of Despair. Now this is kind of a little bit crazy from me, potentially. I think there's going to be another archetype that springs from this, and I don't think people are going to expect it. I think we're going to lose triple Blood Rune as a deck. The win condition of Mograine, that's not going to be there anymore. That card is going out of the set. They're also losing Patchwork. However, Soul Stealer is moving from triple blood to double blood. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to get a competing deck of double blood, single unholy. And the way I kind of envisage this right now is that instead of having Mograine as your win condition, you'll put Plagues into your opponent's deck. Not as extensively as the Triple Unholy Plague Death Knight deck or the Double Unholy Single Frost Death Knight deck. But you'll throw in a few Plagues, and eventually, just with all of your control cards, you're going to start doing 3 damage to their face eventually, right? You're going to get like the Mograine effect, thanks to Hellier. And I think this might legitimately be good enough. I think there's enough tools still in the archetype for good control. They've still got the spend corpses to kill boards. Soul Stealer's still going to be in there. And I think Threads of Despair, as I mentioned, is just and this was in a previous video, this is like Death Knight Defile. And I think they would love Defile in this deck for early game board clear. They're losing, I believe, the 2 damage, Blood Boil it's called. They're losing 2 damage to all, so I think Threads of Despair will replace Blood Boil, and I actually think it's going to be better than Blood Boil. So I'm actually giving this card 4 stars. I also think the Headless Horseman might see play. In fact, he definitely will see play in that deck as well. So I think Headless Horseman is just going to be in many, many decks. And I think the main decks going forwards will be Rainbow. I think then the Plague Death Knight deck will still also be tier 1, which is Double Unholy Single Frost. I think then there is going to be the Control deck from nowhere, which is going to be Double Blood Single Unholy. And finally, I think we'll have this hand buff deck, which is Single Blood, and Double Unholy. And also, actually, we'll have Triple Unholy. And then I think Frost will be in multiple tiers below that. You can see why I think the star ratings for Death Knight are very complicated right now. Finally, we have Dr. Stitch and Sew, the card with the worst text ever in Hearthstone. Despite that, it's getting 5 stars as well. I think this is just going to slot into a lot of decks. I think you'll put this into your Rainbow deck as well. It's hard to clear it. It's a pretty decent control option, right? You play it, it sows 2 minions into, and 3 minions into it, sorry. And you can use this as, like, at the very least, a stat beat stick to beat people down with. Generates you more corpses as well, which is nice for the anticlimactic necrotic explosion deck. And also, I think you'll run this maybe in your Double Blood, Single Unholy. I could see it being ran almost in every single deck. It has no rune requirements. It's just a very solid card. So I'm giving it 5 stars because I think you'll just see play in all of these decks, basically. Alright, up to a more easy class now. It's Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter has 2 mechanics, as I would call it. There is this Demon Hunter deck, where you have Window Shop and the Blind Box and Magtheridon and Umpire's Grasp. Then there's this sort of value-y archetype in there, value-y control archetype, where you have like Workshop Mishap, CCG, and Ball Hog. I think that the Demon Hunter deck hasn't got enough support right now for it to work. If it does work well, it's actually going to be Blind Box that carries this. If Blind Box is very consistent in getting you stuff like Sargarius on the Outcast, then this deck actually may be tier 2, but I don't see it being tier 2. I think the Demon Hunter deck is going to be tier 3. Similarly, I quite like the Highlander Demon Hunter deck. I always have. I think the payoff for the Highlander is really good for it. Unfortunately, Demon Hunter just didn't have the backbone to support it. I think all 7 of these cards, and by 7 I mean 8, all 8 of these cards could go into this Highlander deck, which is a nice little bit of support for it. CCG is good for value. Ballhog is a pretty decent, keep my health up, clearing boards. Workshop Mishap is not a bad control option. I think red card into Magtheridon might actually be legitimately acceptable, and that therefore red card will also make play in this Highlander deck. And then similar for the other 3 cards, which I think would have just gone into the Demon deck, will probably go into the Highlander deck as well. That being said, I think Highlander Demon Hunter is going to be tier 3 at best, and that's kind of being generous. It's probably going to sit the very low end of that. All in all, I'm going to give all of these cards 3 stars. I think they're all going to see play in some sort of value-y Demon Hunter deck. The Highlander deck, unfortunately, is going to get hurt really hard because my other gut feeling is that Plague, Death Knight, now that Steam Cleaner will rotate out, is going to be insane. I think it's going to make every Highlanders deck life a misery. So they're going to get hurt by that. Now, I just don't think there's enough demon support for big Demon Hunter right now. So, yep, 3 stars to all of these. The final 2 cards are Spirit of the Team and Lethal Opal Spellstone. Both of these cards reward you for attacking. I don't think there's a weapon-based Smoke the Face archetype available for Demon Hunter. That being said, Naga Demon Hunter I've also put as a deck that I think will just completely die off after the rotation. They're losing Predation, they're losing Slither Spear. They lose a lot of Naga support, some spell support, and I just don't think there's going to be that chaining of effects anymore. So maybe the Void from that aggro Demon Hunter deck might be replaced by the Weapon Demon Hunter deck. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's a good enough weapon right now. I think Lethal Opal Spellstone is, frankly, a bad card unless you attack multiple times per turn. There are 2, I think there's only 2 cards right now in Death Knight that allows you to do that. One of them is the multi-attack, and the other one is Going Down Swinging, which is a legendary. So you've basically only got 3 cards that could, really crank this up. There's better draw options in Demon Hunter, so I think this is only going to see play in a weapon-based deck, and I don't think the weapon-based deck is there. I'm giving both of these 1 star. This being said, watch out for this space, because I think it's very, very close, this Weapon Demon Hunter deck, from being a thing. I think it's only it might be 6 cards off. It kind of needs a really good weapon, and ideally another multi-attacking tool. As soon as it gets that, this could honestly rise into tier 1 deckdom. So it might just hop over all of these cards. We've had this give your Demon Hunter all the attack in the game and smoke them in the face before. It was tier 1, it was really obnoxious, and I think both of these cards would enable that archetype. It's just not there quite yet. Finally, we're going into Druid Land, and this is the card that I mentioned in the intro that I'm going to give a slightly higher star rating to it because I think it's just going to be in almost all Druid decks going forwards. This is in Smallin. 3 mana, reduce the cost and attack of all minions in your deck by 1. It is literally going to be the great combo enabler for Druid. There's clear intention that Druid is going to go into a spell Druid format. Therefore, in Smallin we'll be enabling these combos, and therefore will be in just almost all Druid decks. So I've given this one 5 stars. You may have now guessed by the tone of this, it means I think this spell damage Druid deck, which would also include Chia Drake, Alonius, Bottomless Toy Chest, Sparkling Vial, Magical Dollhouse, Woodland Wonders, and I don't think it'll include Wind Up Sapling, but I think the intention was it would have gone into this deck. I don't think this will be a tier 1 deck. I actually don't think you'll be able to survive through hyper-aggressive decks. Even with the Woodland Wonder, with the Magical Dollhouse play where you get this, potentially on turn 2, you get 2 1/5 Beetles with Taunt, which is like a nightmare for aggro. I don't think it's going to be consistent enough, and I don't think there's enough minion support to survive through the early game. Bearing in mind as well that Druid has literally lost all of its ramps. Well, not all of it. Almost all of its ramp support, but at least the good ramp support that comes in the earlier game. They've lost almost all of that, so I think Druid is going to be in a really weird spot. That being said, I think this, if you can survive to get to your combo turn, I think it's going to be a pretty potent combo, let's put it that way. Anyway, I've predicted it's going to land into tier 2, so I should have given Sparkling Vial 4 stars, my bad, 4 stars! I put the wrong image there. Yeah, these should all be 4 stars, ignore the little error. Wind Up Sapling, on the other hand, which I think was meant to be in this deck so that you would get copies of Alonius, which gave you more spell damage and doubled your spell damage bonus. Your Chia Drake minis in there as well to crank up your spell damage, and then you would just rattle off a bunch of spells thanks to Sparkling Vial. You would be discounting them for 0. You may also Bottomless Toy Chest your Sparkling Vial, so you get even more, damage along the way. And Dollhouse for even more spell damage. I think the combo all makes sense. It's just living to do it. I don't think that combo will need Wind Up Sapling. I've built a deck, I didn't put it in there. I think simply it's just too slow. So I'm actually giving this 1 star. Final 2 cards, Sky Mother Aviana. This could go into the spell damage deck. I don't think it will do, though. You're a combo deck, right? Why would you make your combo harder to play? And playing Sky Mother Aviana is making your combo harder to play. Sure, you live longer, but at what cost, right? So I don't think this will go into the spell damage deck. Where I think it might go into are the Dragon Druid decks, which, when I mentioned in the intro that I think that there are no tier 2 decks surviving, the one tier 2 deck that I think will survive is Dragon Druid. There's a little bit of addition of new dragons into that deck, and actually the rotations of the sets don't really affect that deck too much, that or even the Highlander variant. I can see this going into both. I can definitely see it going into the Highlander variant. I know that 10 random legendaries, you might get a duplicate, which turns off your Highlander effect. I think you will just accept that, though, to live later into the game, to go longer and longer and longer, and just simply outvalue your opponent. I can also see this going, and this is going to be my hot take for the set. I think Button Druid is also going to be a tier 2 deck. I think it's going to rise back up thanks to some of the neutral card additions. And I think Sky Mother Aviana will go into that deck as well. So I've given this 4 stars as well. I don't think any of the Druid decks will quite reach tier 1. They're all going to be in tier 2. And it's just going to be this amalgamation of Druids again. We're going to have Dragon Druids, Highlander Dragons, we're going to have Button Druid, we're going to have Spell Damage Druid. And they're all going to live in this space in tier 2, I think. Just not quite cutting the mustard. Finally is Jade Display. Obviously, this was a nod back to Jade Golems. Obviously, it being called a Jade Display and having no other support is pretty bad, therefore 1 star. I just don't think there's enough support. I've seen some theory crafted decks out there to get maximum value of your Jade Displays. I think it's just a pipe dream. I don't know why you would do this over just smoking your opponent down with spells instead. Anyway, that is the star ratings for the Death Knight, the Demon Hunter, and the Druid set. I will be continuing this on each and every day, so let me know if you think I've got any of them especially wrong, and we can have a discussion in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.